Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the focus on the opioid crisis that grips every community to some degree and affects every state. Especially critical for our veterans, who are twice as likely to die from accidental overdoses. As we're slowly acknowledging the depths of the opioid crisis, which is good, we seldom acknowledge one of the simplest, most effective solutions: medical marijuana, cannabis, now available in 28 states, largely driven by the voters, not the politicians. Most recently in Florida, where their voters approved it by over 70%. I've distributed some information here entitled A Physician Guide to Cannabis-Assisted Opioid Reduction. On the back are the citations for each of the points that are on this chart, referencing cannabis reducing opioid overdose mortality, how cannabis reduces opioid consumption, how cannabis can prevent dose escalation and the development of opioid tolerance. Cannabis alone or in combination with opioids could be a viable first-line analgesic. Mr. Chairman, we don't talk much about this, although on the floor of the House repeatedly over the last 3 years, Congress has been moving in this direction and voted last Congress to have the Veterans Administration be able to work with veterans in states where medical marijuana is legal. But I focus on just one simple item, not the facts, which I hope this committee would look at, but there's one piece of legislation that I've introduced with Dr. Andy Harris, somebody who doesn't agree with me about the efficacy of medical marijuana, but he strongly agrees with me that there's no longer any reason for the federal government to interfere with research to be able to prove it. The federal government has a stranglehold on this research. We have bipartisan legislation, 3391, which would break that stranglehold and be able to have robust research to resolve these questions so there would no longer be any doubt. This is the cheapest, most effective way to be able to stop the crisis. Where people have access to medical marijuana, there are fewer overdoses, and people opt for it dealing with chronic pain. I would appreciate the subcommittee looking at this issue as your time permits. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member.
Congressman proposes legislation to allow cops to use cannabis, slams drug war. By Justin Gardner, October 15, 2017. As the era of alternative facts takes hold across the political spectrum and federal government buries its head in ignorance, lawmakers are increasingly challenging facets of the insanity. Medical cannabis is receiving particular attention, with supporters becoming even more passionate after the appointment of drug warrior Jeff Sessions to Attorney General. According to Marijuana Moment, Congressman Matt Gaetz, RFL, testified in a House Judiciary Committee that medical cannabis has great potential to treat mental health issues and should be made available to everyone, including cops. Many lawmakers are trying to change VA policies to allow medical cannabis for veterans with PTSD, but Gaetz is taking this logic a step further with law enforcement. Our policies should follow the science and not this ridiculous, antiquated dogma perpetuated by lies through the federal government, said Gaetz. The legislation being considered, titled Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act of 2017, would delve into the mental health practices and services of LEO agencies across the country, and direct the Attorney General to consult with the DOD and VA on how they treat soldiers. Advertisement. Gaetz proposed an amendment which would have required agencies to examine Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs mental health practices and services, including medical cannabis treatment on mental health, that could be adopted by federal, state, local, or tribal law enforcement agencies. As we know, drugs such as SSRIs, with harmful effects on health and public safety, are the method of choice for treating military veterans who suffer trauma after fighting in America's wars of aggression. If patients can use a plant and its extracts for healing, which can't be patented, This is a serious threat to the profits of Big Pharma. Read more. NYPD cops dramatically reduce arrest rate for pot, and the city didn't fall into chaos. After blowback from several lawmakers who felt law enforcement wasn't the place to pursue cannabis reform, Gates withdrew his amendment. But the point was made, there is mounting resistance to the inhumane, logically bankrupt war on drugs. The federal government has lied to the American people for a generation about cannabis, said Gates as his amendment was discussed for about 30 minutes. There is substantial evidence that indicates that there is a case to be made for the medical efficacy of cannabis in the treatment of mental health and particularly PTSD. The Florida congressman noted for the record, the idiotic, indefensible policy in this country where we list cannabis as a Schedule I drug. The thought of cops using medical cannabis is interesting, considering the violent U.S. police state and its assault on the populace through the war on drugs. Perhaps those cops who actually believe a person should be arrested for a plant would have second thoughts if they actually experienced the benefits of said plant. More importantly, could the extraordinary rate of police-initiated violence go down if cops could toke up after work? Even though fellow lawmakers assured Gates they supported his efforts at cannabis reform, they must have been shocked by the truth bombs he dropped during the hearing. There is no contesting the statements Gates made about the lies and the disregard of scientific fact that dominate U.S. drug policy. These moments of clarity in Congress are refreshing indeed. A day before Gates made his statements, Representative Earl Blumenauer testified before a House subcommittee on health that medical cannabis can solve the opioid crisis. He provided strong scientific evidence to make his point and lambasted the stranglehold federal government has on cannabis research.
An amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 2228, offered by Mr. Gates of Florida. Page 2, line 3.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
I thank the chairman, and this amendment is offered in pursuit of common sense, bipartisan cannabis reform. And I would like to thank Chairman Goodlatte for, in July, making the commitment that we would advance legislation in this Congress through this committee that would liberalize the process to allow for more research into the impacts of medical cannabis on Americans who are able to legally use it within their respective states. And I would also like to report that just yesterday, Chairman Goodlatte reaffirmed that commitment with great sincerity, and I appreciate his effort and his willingness to work with me on the issue. This legislation requires the Department of Justice to work with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense to develop a report on various impacts regarding mental health that could be used for the benefit of those in law enforcement. My amendment would insert within that report a determination as to whether or not there is evidence that medical cannabis can actually yield better mental health care outcomes. Now, why do we need the amendment? Could we just remain silent on it and assume that impacts of medical cannabis would be included? Unfortunately, there's been strong resistance and a functional gag rule at the VA regarding medical cannabis and its effects. As recently as June 9th, 2017, the Arizona Republic reported a statement from a VA public affairs officer who said, "We are not permitted to prescribe, promote, or even discuss the use of medical marijuana with our veterans." And, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to insert this periodical into the record.
Objection be made a part of the record.
In addition to this gag rule, we've seen a Department of Justice that has been totally non-responsive to requests from my office and other members of Congress regarding why the Department of Justice is getting in the way of medical cannabis research. As a matter of fact, I sent a letter on August 23rd citing a Washington Post article from August 15th, which concluded that the Department of Justice has prevented the DEA from moving forward in its permitting process through medical marijuana research. Though this letter has not been responded to, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to insert it into the record.
Without objection.
Moreover, the American Legion has indicated that it would be very helpful to them and to their members if we didn't have the processes in place at the VA that supported this gag rule and that impaired our ability to do research. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to insert support from the American Legion into the record through this letter.
Without objection, be made a part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Now, we if we are able to adopt this amendment, I think there is substantial evidence that indicates that there is a case to be made for the medical efficacy of cannabis in the treatment of mental health, and particularly PTSD. I would specifically cite a study from Israel in 2014, and by the way, these studies have to occur in Israel and overseas because we have an idiotic, indefensible policy in this country where we list cannabis as a Schedule I drug. But this Israel study indicates that, and I quote now, research on the efficacy of cannabis for the treatment of PTSD is still in its infancy. However, preliminary results are promising. Oral THC and synthetic cannabinoids have demonstrated effectiveness for improving sleep duration, quality, reducing nightmares and daytime flashbacks among treatment-resistant patients. That study goes on to indicate that this oral THC, not smoked, reduces symptom severity, reduces nightmares, and reduces symptoms of hyperarousal in PTSD patients. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to insert this study and the related documentation into the record.
An objection be made a part of the record.
The final reason that I think that this amendment would be very important to adopt and expressly allow is because it would provide some comfort to universities who are interested in engaging in this research and being helpful to those in our military community, in our veteran community, and in our law enforcement community. I have a March 17th, 2014 letter from the University of Florida, from their president at the time. He transmitted this to me, and it is a legal opinion that the University of Florida obtained, saying even though they wanted to go do this research, even though they wanted to use it to help people in law enforcement, veterans, and others who are impacted by these ailments, that the current policies of the federal government would impair over $100 million in research grants for the University of Florida. And so the inaction and silence of Congress is leading to a process where the brightest, most clinically adept researchers in the world are not able to do this research. And, Mr. Chairman, I would seek unanimous consent to insert this letter into the record.
Objection be made a part of the record.
I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence of the amendment. I believe the adoption of this amendment would ensure that we get simply a full picture of the research as we're making decisions that can help our law enforcement officials, our veterans, and active duty service members, and I yield back.
Gentleman yield. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I, as the gentleman well knows, have indicated publicly in this committee on more than one occasion that I believe that the committee should take steps to enable the research into the benefits that research might uncover for the chemicals that are contained in cannabis. And the gentleman also knows that we are working with his staff, working with him to accomplish that. In fact, I believe there is legislation that has reached the drafting stage right now. I would encourage the gentleman to withdraw this amendment and focus on that, with my assurance that we will continue to make every effort to find the support in this committee to bring that forward and not put it into this legislation dealing specifically with law enforcement officers, because I think providing for the suggestion that cannabis would be a solution here is kind of getting ahead of what you're hoping to accomplish with your research legislation, especially when you consider that law enforcement officers, state by state, are required to enforce different kinds of laws, including laws related to cannabis. So it would be my hope that the gentleman would keep that issue out of this particular legislation to help law enforcement officers. And I believe the law enforcement organizations that support this legislation have the same perspective on this, and then take the assurance of myself and many other members of this committee who want to work with you on your goal.
Mr. Chairman.
I'd be happy to yield the gentleman from...
Thank you. Let me begin by commending the gentleman from Florida for this amendment. It's very well intentioned, and obviously I think that the medical benefits of marijuana, of cannabis, in many different situations has been well established, and having a research bar is absurd. My question about this amendment, though, is to mandate the Department of Justice to do this study, given the complete prejudice against medical marijuana by the current Attorney General, might just get a hatchet job of a negative research report and not an honest research report. So I would certainly like to see some legislation that perhaps would say the Department of Justice combined with the National Institutes of Health or something, but some measure to make to give give us some reason to believe we get an honest research would make sense.
I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and if it's permissible, I'd like to take the chairman's suggestion under advisement as I hear from other members of the committee who may want to speak on the issue. As to the gentleman from New York's statement, my belief is that the federal government has lied to the American people for a generation about cannabis, and even research that is pre-cooked, even research that is predetermined, entered into the public square, I think will elevate the level of debate.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you totally. The federal government has lied for more than a generation, but I think, and the goal of your amendment is excellent, and I certainly agree with it, but I think we should carefully craft it so as to minimize the odds that we get a negative hit job instead of an honest research report.
Mr. Chairman, I fear my time has more than expired. I don't know who controls the time.
It's my time. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from the gentleman.
Thank you for yielding,
Florida.
Mr. Chairman. As Congressman Gates know, I supported, as did the Florida Sheriff's Association, supported Charlotte's Web in cannabis for treatment under certain conditions within the state of Florida. And we were all very supportive of that, having seen the efficacy of some treatment from cannabis extractions. But I do believe, as the gentleman from New York said, in this study, I think that adds some complexities that we really don't need in this bill. But I would like to see the other legislation that you're looking at. And I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to strike the last word.
Always ready
I
for 5
appreciate my colleague from Florida's amendment. I, too, feel that it is not appropriate for this particular bill. And you've cited any number of studies showing the benefits of cannabis oil. On the other side of it, there are also numerous studies that contradict it. So I genuinely believe in the best interests of parents, veterans, those who are suffering from PTSD, autistic children, those with seizure disorders, and others experiencing pain relief and progress from cannabis oil, that we owe it to these families and these individuals to be thorough and deliberate and diligent and move forward in a more coordinated way, which I think, candidly, I would like to see us do that and have the courtesy and the opportunity to review a bill on this versus just getting an amendment dropped in. I've indicated that I would be very happy to work with you on it for something that is a specific statutory language, because I think this is an important issue. It's going to impact a lot of people, and we should address it in the most meticulous, thorough manner, because I believe the families out there are counting on us to do that. And so I hope that the gentleman from Florida will withdraw so that we can work together, and I pledge my support to working with you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
First gentleman from Rhode Island, seek recognition.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by applauding Mr. Gates for the introduction of this amendment and for his very long, despite his young age, advocacy for raising this issue and for not only introducing legislation but raising it regularly in our deliberations. And I would just suggest, in response to the gentleman from New York's concern, sometimes opportunities present themselves, and I think Mr. Gates is right to seize it. I think the one thing that I would say that would mitigate some concerns about the Attorney General's view on this is that the section requires the Attorney General to consult with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, which, as we know, is the Veterans Affairs and Veterans Administration is a very comprehensive health care organization with medical personnel and research capabilities. And I think that, coupled with the fact that this surrounds veterans, would hopefully raise the expectation that this report be done in a way which honors the service to our veterans in a respectful and accurate way. And I think obviously there will be people who would attack the report depending on what it says, but I think that this is an opportunity to begin this national dialogue, and if Mr. Gates proceeds with the amendment, I'm prepared to support it, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Move to strike the last word. I just want to speak on the amendment for a moment.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in very strong favor of the amendment offered by the distinguished gentleman from Florida. I had the honor of working in the Maryland State Senate as the floor leader for our medical marijuana plan, which ended up winning, I think, with near unanimous support and had the support in public opinion polls of upwards of 85 or 90% of the people. We heard very convincing testimony about how medical cannabis aids people experiencing a variety of ailments, both medical and mental health, anything from leukemia and cancer to multiple sclerosis, cystic fibrosis, depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and so on. And the accumulating evidence is quite overwhelming. I'm sensitive to the concerns raised by our colleague, Mr. Nadler from New York, about how it's quite possible that there could be a report that's fixed and gerrymandered against a proper assessment of the medical testimony and evidence that's out there. However, I think that this legislation is important, and I think we've got to hope that the Department of Justice would act in good faith in terms of collecting the real evidence that's out there. And if not, we'll have to find another vehicle upon which to ride so that
With the gentleman yield,
yes, by all means.
There is another vehicle. It's being drafted right now, and I would urge you to focus on that because that will dedicate itself entirely to the objective the gentleman wants, rather than mixing it in with some other things that are completely unrelated to that, and I think jeopardize this legislation. And so I think it's better that we stick with the language that has been carefully drafted here, that's been agreed upon by a number of law enforcement organizations that want research done in this area, and stick with that, and then follow through on the commitment that the committee has made, and I certainly have made to the gentleman, not just the gentleman from Florida, but others on this committee, that we address this issue separately.
Well, Mr. Chairman, of course, I would defer to your expertise on it. I don't know what legislation you're referring to that's currently in motion. Is it before our committee?
Legislation, yeah. Well, legislation that the gentleman from Florida has been working on pretty much since he arrived here, that would change the laws regarding the access to cannabis for research purposes. That I think could be very enlightening in terms of what chemicals in cannabis might be suitable for various types of medical treatments and what might not be.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm delighted to hear that, and I'll defer then to the gentleman from Florida who has the best sense of the whole legislative terrain here. I would just love to see some opportunity for us to advance this cause and to vindicate the public's tremendous passionate interest in this subject and making sure that the Congress does get the opportunity to take the side of those who are promoting medical cannabis. I'll yield to the gentleman from Florida.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and simply to address the question about whether or not this is an appropriate vehicle, here's why this is so important in this bill. If we do not expressly list medical cannabis as something that has to be included in the report, it expressly will not be included in the report because of the gag rule that exists at the VA. And so it is not as if we can simply do another bill and achieve the objective here for law enforcement. If we do not put my amendment in this bill, law enforcement will be left out of the potential research that could occur that could be helpful to people because of these indefensible policies that exist in the federal government to not even talk about research impacts, and I yield back.
Well, then I would be inclined to support this amendment without any prejudice to other legislation that we might do.
Gentleman yield?
Yes, by all means.
Would the gentleman yield? I just want to say that based on the arguments of Mrs. Cicilline and Mr. Raskin and the gentleman from Florida, I'm going to support the amendment.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back to you.
Gentleman from Tennessee, seek recognition.
Primarily to praise the gentleman from Florida for his good amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Shouldn't I get 10 minutes for that? I mean, he's on your side. This is a very worthwhile amendment. It helps law enforcement, and it helps science, and he brought several outstanding articles to be entered in the record, and I commend him for his research and his diligence and his approach. I'd like to ask the chair if he'd yield. The bill that you've talked about possibly introducing, who would it direct doing a study on medical marijuana?
It would make it possible for people all over this country, primarily researchers at universities, I would suspect, and medical facilities, to be able to do research using cannabis to determine whether there are drugs that would be derived from that product that has been very difficult to do research on now.
So it would lift the ban. It wouldn't necessarily tell some justice or DEA or somebody to do a study.
No, I agree with the criticism of various governmental organizations. They're not the place where this research should be done.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
They need to be instructed to get out of the way of the research.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Some of his 10 minutes. Mr. Chairman, do we have a timeline for that other bill? Because I think it could move to this debate fairly quickly if we could have a commitment to a timeline.
Would the gentleman repeat his question?
I was wondering if there was a timeline for the other bill that would help everyone realize how soon that could be.
I think it could be very soon. The gentleman is in the process of drafting that legislation in consultation with the committee staff right now, and I am happy to move it when it's ready, and we have a bipartisan consensus. I can just say that with regard to this bill, the law enforcement organizations that have been promoting this legislation are all represented here in the committee hearing room today, and they're all adamantly opposed to this because they're worried that we're mixing two very important issues together in a way that could jeopardize their bill. So that's why I encourage the gentleman from Florida to withdraw this amendment and work on the legislation as we have previously committed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly would look forward to voting for that bill if we can move it in a timely fashion, and I think it would be helpful. Thank you for yielding.
Thank you. I understand, and I appreciate the chairman, because I remember when he made that suggestion that he would work with us. I think it was last summer.
This summer.
Which was also last summer. But last summer does sound better, or worse. But we're coming along, and hopefully it won't fall to deliberations and time and inaction. But it's necessary, and it has been generations and generations and generations from Harry Anslinger. We have lots of veterans we work with in our office, and so many of them tell me that it helps them with PTSD. It helps with other illnesses as well. In fact, tomorrow, Whoopi Goldberg is going to be on the Hill and talking about the positive benefits for women in particular on different problems they have. There's no reason that science shouldn't come up with all kind of ways that man can avoid illness and or pain. And if we can avoid pain and illness with other human beings, we're doing the right thing. And there's very little we can do that's more important than that. And so I commend the gentleman, and I'll follow his lead, and I appreciate the chairman's bill, and I hope that comes out soon. And I look forward to supporting it as well, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For purpose, the gentleman from Florida, who I yielded to earlier, so I have not recognized him separately, what purpose does he seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak against the bill, the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to make a commitment as well to my good friend from Florida to work with you on this other piece of legislation as we've worked together on many other pieces of state legislation, including Charlotte's Web. And because I have to admit, I was a naysayer going into that back before Florida passed that. But as I researched, as I was made aware of different circumstances with patients and their cures, as we saw, I was very supportive of that as the legislative chairman for the Florida Sheriffs. And we were able to get that passed through a Republican-controlled House and Senate. So I want to assure you, I think that the legislation that you're looking at is incredibly important because it puts that study in the universities and the medical facilities where it belongs. I can tell you as a former sheriff, and I don't want to speak for all sheriffs or all police chiefs, but I can tell you I would be a little leery of a pilot program that was going to bring cannabis treatment into my agency. And so I believe the better place for this would in fact be in the university system and in the medical community, not in our law enforcement agencies. So I yield back.
With the gentleman yield, the gentleman makes a good point, but furthermore, this amendment doesn't accomplish any of that. All this amendment says is that they'll do a study of whether this would be helpful. It doesn't create anything that would help them.
Right.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I would make the point that there's no effort here to bring cannabis into a law enforcement agency. The goal of this amendment is to ensure that law enforcement isn't left out, because right now this legislation rightly requires an appropriate study of that which could improve the mental health of law enforcement officials, a goal that is shared by every member of this committee and likely by every member of the Congress. The concern is that because there is this existing policy at the VA not to share that which is known, not to share the clinical results that come to people. There's an individual named Leo Bridgewater who was deployed to Iraq 3 times. He was so worried about saying he had PTSD to get medical cannabis, he fabricated a knee injury in order to use that to get cannabis. But then as a consequence, his nightmares satiated. He was able to put his family life back together. And this was not even with euphoric cannabis. This was with CBD oil that doesn't impair cognitive function, but that can cause brain receptors that are hyperactive in people with PTSD. I would hate to see us pursue better mental health care outcomes with some folks and then leave law enforcement behind in this bill because we weren't willing to take information from the VA where there's this existing gag rule and apply that science. All of that said, I greatly appreciate my colleagues who have weighed in on this subject. I do believe it would be improper to leave law enforcement behind. In July, there was a mental health substance abuse piece of legislation that my cannabis amendment was germane to. I was assured that with great haste, the committee would work with me on developing an alternative to that. We sit here today not having had that work product developed. I have not received any work product from the Judiciary Committee regarding potential legislative drafts. In fact, the only work product that I could assume everyone is referencing is H.R. 2020, which I've introduced to remove cannabis from the list of Schedule I drugs. So I'm very grateful that that has such consensus, and I look forward to it being brought up. This will now be the second time in this Congress that I will have withdrawn a germane amendment to a bill that could help people merely by introducing science into the debate. And I don't even prejudge the science. The science may say there are good outcomes. The science may say there are bad outcomes. I just think that our policy should follow the science and not this ridiculous, antiquated dogma perpetuated by lies through the federal government. And so this will be the second time that I withdraw a similar amendment. I don't know that there'll be a third if this committee brings up other legislation upon which there would be a germane amendment. And, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd like to withdraw my amendment.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Are there further amendments to H.R. to this 2228?
Need a car? Don't forget to stop by carmarshal.com where you can scout through over 100,000 new and used car vehicles. Take a look around. Get you a new affordable car. carmarshal.com.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I found that I had to make a change this ending on my videos, letting you know about the channel and fair use laws, you know, how we can report on other people's reporting and how it's good, how it's bad, etc. But you guys can look it up yourself. It is legal. It's in there. But like I've told you before, that I've been cut off from making money on YouTube for 4 years. It's really weird, bizarre, but They cut the money off, but they said you can keep the channel, and now YouTube makes all the money. And if you get bored, plug it into Social Blade website, and you'll see that they are making a huge amount off the site. Right now it's at 63 million views, 53,000 subscribers, almost 3 million views a month. You know, trying to wake people up, and I make nothing. In fact, I got a customer that's ex-congressman. He said if I could ever find a lawyer, sue YouTube on it. But because this is nuts, 4 hours a day, and to save America. You know, but at the same time, it's worth it. Look at what our founding fathers did. They died for this country. So, but getting back to the money part, this is why I'm redoing the video. Is my dream of everyone giving $1, and it's going to be $53,000 a year, or if they did Patreon, which you know, can be monthly. That is not working. That'd be great if it did. Nothing is perfect. And I appreciate the people that do donate, you know, what they can on PayPal. And there again, I'm letting you guys know that is not much. It is, you know, monthly is, oh my God. So anyways, yes, you cannot live on it. It's very, very, very low amount. But the dollar things, I do appreciate that. But when I first said everybody give $1, that's not working. I'm just letting you guys know it's, yeah, that dream. Everybody gives $1. 53,000 subscribers, it's not working. So, yes, if you can give more than that, you know, I appreciate it. Like I said, you know, I'm in a unique situation where, you know, we're already debt-free, and I'm not rich, but with the little business that we have, I am able to do what I am able to do 45 hours a day, you know, letting you guys know what's going on. In 4 years, I've did the whole thing myself, 12,000 videos on there. I literally get emails where people are like, holy crap, I never knew it was this bad. And it is this bad, and it's getting worse every day because we have the internet, we have cell phones, we have cameras everywhere now, and it's just disgusting what's going on. And then, as you guys know too, we got Trump, we got Jeff Sessions doing a war on drugs, and now he wants to go after the forfeiture laws again. It's just unfreaking real. So if you can give more than that dream of everybody giving $1, yeah, that old video, that's not working. They're not, they're just not. So anyways, if you can give more than that dream is not working. Hardly anybody is giving. There you go. So that's why I'm remaking the video. If you can give more than that, that would be great. And there again, like I said, the Patreon's there. There is some people on there that are starting to give, but there again, it's very, very low. And like I said, I don't want to get rich off of that. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because, you know, it's still so stinking corrupt. It's not even funny. My court case that I'm going to be paying out of my pocket myself with Charlotte County's coming up. They illegally looked me up and then posted all my information on LEOAFFAIRS website. They basically doxed me, however you want to say that. I forget what the word is, and they outed me, man. And that information on that site went out to 500 sheriffs, deputies, people that work at the jail, etc., etc., etc. So, yeah, it is very, very scary, but we're going to do a federal case, 1983 case, violating freedom of speech. We have 17 cameras in the house now. We got 2 cameras in the car. I always carry a camera plus a cell phone. A lot of people are highly recommending I get a vest now. If I could, if the wife would let me, I would run for sheriff. We are trying to push the thing nationwide right now, where just to mix it up and to get the topics out there is register to run for sheriff, NPA, no party affiliation, as a write-in, and that is completely free, and you can participate in the elections. And there's a lot of stuff. We got a guy, James McLinnis in Pinellas County, Tampa, who almost won. He experienced the corruption himself. The story is unbelievable. Look him up. It's mind-blowing what they did. It pissed him off. He is very, very smart. He has way more money than I did. He ran for sheriff at the last 3 months last year in 2016 and almost won. He got all of the black vote. And the reason why he did that is because he ran on, I will not bust, we're in Florida, I will not bust anybody for weed anymore unless it's an ungodly huge amount, like pounds. And then he also ran in no more victimless crimes, no more of this freaking road pirate bull crap. And then he was going to cut the budget by 30%. And when you think about that, you can. If you stop the road pirates, you can get rid of a bunch of people. Gone. So, the wife has been saying, yes, I can, yes, I can't. So I don't know. We're trying to find somebody that can do it because I am busy doing this anyways. But, so I'm making a video, like I said, that $1 a month from everybody, you know, for 53,000 subscribers, that is not working. I'm just letting you guys know. Absolutely give way more than $1 a month. If you can, I appreciate anything. By the way, remember, too, when you give that, PayPal takes like freaking 15 to 20%, so it's even worse than that. But, and there again, like I'm letting you guys know, it's way, what I get is very, very low. Appreciate it. But it is very, very low. Can't live on it. I'm just, you know, I'm working, and that's what I'm working on. And that court case is going to cost a buttload of money. That's federal court. Just the filing fees and the depositions that we're going to be doing with this corrupt cop. So there's another reason to give. We are going to be doing a deposition with this very corrupt. He was in a drug squad. He is a bad guy. He's on steroids. We heard steroids are rampant here. That's why their attitude is so bad. And we are going to get him on video, and it will be on YouTube. So that case alone is $5,000 just to bring it to court, and that's my money out of my pocket. So there's another reason to give, and give way more than $1 if you can. So keep that in mind. This is the new video, and I see, God, I talk a lot. It's already 7 minutes, but had to make it just to let you know that $1 a month from everybody is not working. They're not doing it. So if you can give more than that, please. So thanks. Keep it up. Share, like, subscribe, tell your friends, send me your videos on corruption, and I'll post it.